Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Nutrient Management webinar series. I'm Matthew Wells with Lethbridge County, and I'll be your host for the upcoming presentations. This series is brought to you by the collaborative efforts of Lethbridge County, County of Warner, and County of Newell. Before we begin, I'll go over some items of housekeeping. So as you saw when entering the webinar, the series is being recorded. The recordings will be posted on the Nutrient Management website, Lethbridge County YouTube channel, and the Lethbridge County website once the webinar series has been completed. A link to the recordings will be sent out to all the participants in case you'd like to review the sessions or were unable to participate in one or more of the presentations. Any questions that you have can be typed in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen and will be answered once both presentations have been completed. Please feel free to utilize the chat. A good starting point is getting to know where everyone is from. So if you wouldn't mind posting what town, province, and state you are in the chat, it would be greatly appreciated. It'd be interesting to know how far of a reach this webinar series has. So we have CEU credits available for each presentation and will be shown at the end of the session today. Both are QR codes. All you'll need is the Certified Crop Advisor app to scan to receive credits for today's presentations. Lastly, the webinar is scheduled for 1 hour each day. However, we can certainly extend it if needed for questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist today, Trevor Wallace, who will discuss creating a nutrient management plan. So Trevor has been working in the agricultural sector for over 25 years, including extension and research in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and the Maritimes. Currently, he is the Provincial Nutrient Management Specialist with Alberta Agriculture, Forestry, and Rural Economic Development based out of Leduc. His role includes an extension, research, and policy development responsibilities. Trevor works with a variety of stakeholders to develop and implement programs that support a sustainable agriculture sector. Trevor graduated from the University of Saskatchewan with a Bachelor of Science in Biology, a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, and later completed his Master of Science in Agriculture. In addition to a certificate in audit education from University of Alberta. So welcome, Trevor.
Oh, thank you very much, Matt, for having me. Really appreciate it. It's great to get out and start doing some meetings again. It's been a long time. Is the screen, am I sharing my screen properly? Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it.
And I sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay. My camera's not on, which is fine. If you want, I can turn it on later. So I was asked just to give a high-level presentation on creating a nutrient management plan. So what are the parts of a nutrient management plan? What things would one consider? So I put this together. I'm looking forward to it. So I sort of changed up some of our thinking around nutrient management planning and tried to add some of the new information that we've been creating. Either just in general through research and added into the concepts behind this. So as I was introduced, I work with Alberta Agriculture, Forestry, and Rural Economic Development. I'm based out of Leduc. And we'll just get started here. I believe I've only got half an hour. So sort of the objectives, just sort of the purpose of a nutrient management plan, some of the key considerations or components of a plan, a couple of comments around contingency planning, because that's sort of really important. And then identifying some of the resources that are available. And these are just scratching the surface. There's a ton of resources out there. And we'll cover a few of them that we have available here in Alberta, but there's a lot with some of the companies, a lot within Canada itself, and with our American friends as well. There's a lot of tools available for doing this. So I get a lot of people ask me, what is a nutrient management plan? What's the purpose of them? In essence, they're sort of optimizing yield, enhancing nutrient use efficiency. We can come at it from a crop production point of view. You can come up from an environmental or nuisance point of view. There's various reasons for having one, but essentially we're trying to enhance our nutrient use. If we're using the nutrients, we're not losing them. So it's really the plan lays out strategies and actions to maximize nutrient use efficiency, sort of reduce our chance for losses. It really boils down to the right placement, the right time, the right rate for the right product. So how we're using the nutrient sources that we have, and those nutrient sources may be manure, maybe other kinds of biosolids, or fertilizer obviously is the biggest one that we use, and making sure we're putting them in to get the maximum benefit out of our crop. That's our target. So that's essentially what a nutrient management plan is, or what its purpose is supposed to be doing. The biggest thing that we have in nutrient management plans, they aren't really a linear line. I call them, they go round and round in a circle, and some may argue that they're sort of a mess, because there's a lot of back and forth within a nutrient management plan. And I get a lot of questions from people on how do you start nutrient management planning? Where do you start? And some people start with the crop. Some people start from the field. It really doesn't matter which one you go from, whether you do look at field by field and make a plan accordingly, or if you look by a crop and then tweaking it by field. But we'll go through all of that when we start going a little bit of detail. Essentially, though, eventually we want the entire rotation as sort of part of the nutrient management plan. And then the whole thing sort of brought up to being the whole farm. How all the little fields or large fields interact with each other and our nutrient plan. So that's where we're going. But nutrient management planning does not have to be the whole ball of wax at once. We can start out by individual fields or crops, as I said earlier. Eventually we aggregate them together for a whole farm. We can increase our level of complexity as we get good at nutrient management planning. And a lot of this is what's really happening. We basically started with a fertilizer recommendation, and then we look for ways to improve how we apply that. We have contingency plans on what to do if the environment changes, the weather changes, and we can't follow our yield goals that was anticipated. So eventually we can move it into what's called a comprehensive nutrient management plan, which I'm not going to touch on today, which really broadens nutrient management planning to move the focus away just from looking at fields and fertilizer and application nutrient use to looking at our livestock facilities, environmental areas, technology adoption, things that you might want to do in the operation to, again, enhance the use of nutrients within your system. But I'm not going to get into that detail today. I did want to mention nutrient management planning within the legislation, and this is another thing I didn't want, or I'm not going to go to in too much detail today. There's no requirement under Alberta's legislation to have a nutrient management plan. There's a very specific circumstances where a nutrient management plan is required. If you want to exceed our salinity limits or our nitrate nitrogen limits, you have to have a plan that shows how you're providing equal or greater protection with how you're managing nutrients that would allow you to exceed these limits within our legislation. So these are very specific. The fundamental parts are going to be somewhat similar to the general nutrient management planning that I want to talk about and the BMPs of nutrient management planning. But for the legislative purpose, these are very specific, have a very specific outcome, and they're a lot smaller. The other thing that we have under our legislation, and the legislation is the Agriculture Operation Practices Act. It governs a couple of pieces in Alberta, one of them being the nuisance legislation is within that act, as well as the management of manure and the permitting of our CFOs are all within the Agriculture Operation Practices Act. So, as I said, nutrient management plan is not mandatory under our act, but there are some specific circumstances where you may apply one and you have to show you're providing equal or greater protection than what our limits have. And then there's manure handling plans, and these are basically for operations that plan on moving their manure to somebody else. So they're not planning on spreading it on the field. The manure handling plan is showing how that volume of manure, that volume of nutrients are being managed differently than land application. So that's legislated. We're not going to get into that. We're going to take the approach of nutrient management planning that's general, that anybody can be doing from a beneficial management practice point of view, and where you're going to get your value out of it. The other big question I get from many people is who can develop a nutrient management plan? And, can the producer do it, or do you need an agronomist to do it? And the answer is not clear cut. The producer doing it, yes, of course he can, absolutely. The producer brings a lot of value to this conversation around nutrient management planning. He knows the farm, he knows all the historical information, he knows the field and unique conditions, and his network that he operates in. Without that, we can't develop a very good nutrient management plan. On the other side of the table, though, the agronomists, they provide an outside view, a different set of eyes. They have experience from all the other people that they work with. And they have a often completely different network. So an agronomist can bring you a very good product, but it really needs to be connected to the producer on the side of thing. And so, you know, from a practical point of view, they have to be done together. It's really a combination of the two. The value of what the producer brings, that field expertise that the agronomist may not have, at least initially. Eventually they'll have it, but you need the person that goes to that field to know exactly where we get our best soil samples from, where the old yard site used to be, the old tree lines, where we won't get information that's going to skew our interpretation of that field. And the agronomist brings a whole pack of information from his experiences with dozens of other farmers, where they've tried things, and you can learn and benefit from it. So really, the biggest thing I wanted to promote is no, it doesn't matter who does a nutrient management plan. Either person can do it, or anybody on the farm can do it. But there is a lot of value when both of them are working together to develop a nutrient management plan. The only thing I wanted to emphasize is that really having somebody else, you want a critical eye, somebody other than yourself, to give you some input on that. And whether it's an agronomist or a neighboring farmer, it's good to have that. And you just want to make sure you have a common or complementary philosophy on input management, cropping systems, etc. And that synergy will really help develop a good nutrient management plan that's not just easy to follow, but very successful for your operation. And as you see, when we're going forward, this is really iterative. It's something that it may be a plan in the sense that we write some things down and we have our intentions of going forward, but as everybody knows, no plan is ever really followed because things change and you have to be able to evolve with that. And that's sort of the gist of what I'm going to get into now that we're going to talk a little bit about key information and components of a nutrient management plan. And Matt, feel free to interrupt me if there's something wrong or something that you want to cut in on. That I have no issues with that. Okay.
No, sounds good.
Now, since I can't see an audience or see a crowd, it's really hard to read a group. So moving on into key information and components of a plan, like there's some real key information that you have to have as part of your nutrient management plan. And that's your whole rotation, your future, a little bit of past crops, what your options are. And this is going to help us decide what kind of nutrients we need, when we can apply those nutrients, limitations that we have on nutrients. We're going to develop a target yield, something that we want to achieve. And that's going to give us, you know, a nutrient application, at least a bar that we're aiming for. And it's got to be realistic based on past yield experiences, variety potential, and weather forecast. We need information on the fields. We can't go very far. We can give general information, and it can be a nutrient management plan that maybe doesn't push the crop as much as it could be, or you're putting nutrients on where you don't need to. So we need that field information, not just what nutrients are there, but where are risks of loss. And when I talk about risk assessment or risk of loss, you know, it's really a bad idea to broadcast fertilizer onto a field that you know that regularly floods. Like it's knowing where the issues are in a field will help us apply those nutrients, especially right now when they're a buck. I'm hearing anywhere from $1.40 to $1.20 a pound for nitrogen. We need to apply it where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck. Nutrient options. I mentioned manure and biosolids before. If those are something you can access, that's fantastic. If you're doing some livestock feeding in a field, how do we move those animals around to spread that manure out to get the best benefit and not concentrate it in just one area? What are we using for our fertilizer, and what's our budget? And of course, equipment, inventory options. You know, how can we get it on the land? Is it through our seeders? Do we need to be putting anhydrous ammonia on? What do we have for tools? What do our neighbors have for tools to help us get those nutrients on when we need them? So the one thing, I guess, two things I have to emphasize, even with the nutrient management plan, they're rooted in two fundamental things. And the first one being the weather. No nutrient management plan can be done without consideration of the weather. It's going to influence all the decisions and all the impacts one has on another. And the other thing that I really want to emphasize is the whole thing has to be rooted in economics. It has to be affordable for the operation. What you're putting down, you need to be getting a return back on that maintains your profitability. So those are the two things that are going to fundamentally influence the decisions within a nutrient management plan. And like I said, the plan is simply a rough idea of what we are intending to do this year or next year or the year after. And it's going to be influenced by other decisions and other factors, but it's got to be rooted in economics, and it will be impacted or influenced by weather, no matter what we think is going to happen. So I'm going to start off the whole concept of nutrient management planning, and this is just sort of a where I would start, and it's sort of picking up the crop and the rotation, and this is where I'm going to sort of set some nutrient targets of what I want to apply, what I'm trying to achieve, be it corn or peas or silage, whatever I want to produce. That's what I'm going to use. I could be starting with a field, but for now I'm going to be starting with the cropping system. Then I'm going to move that crop into the various fields that I have and use the information from those fields to further refine that nutrient target and what I want to do. Then make a consideration of the equipment that we're using. And this is, again, going to further refine how much I have to apply. Because if I can't put it all down with the seed, depending on what I'm planting, depending on my seeder, what are my limitations? So if I still need more things like nitrogen, where and how am I going to put it down? Because that's, again, going to affect how much I put down or when I put it down. What sources do I have available to me? Whether I want to use a coated product, something like ESN, or use inhibitors, or use straight 4600, or if I'm using some kind of blends. What do I want to run through my system? And again, it's going to refine what we spread, when we spread, and how we spread. And then finally, the in-crop monitoring. How do we refine the plan? How do we top it up if I need it? What do I need to look for? And this year, this is really important. The two things that I think are really important, at least this year, looking at our fields, especially in areas that this past year with drought conditions, there's going to be a lot of nutrients still left over from last year's application. So refining how much more I want to add, especially at the prices, and some in-crop monitoring to make sure that we're not running into deficiencies for some reason going forward. And then, of course, at the end, into harvest, we're looking at the plan to see how it worked, evaluating it, and start looking at going towards next year's crop and whether we are looking at any kind of fall fertilizer applications or manure applications in preparation for next spring planting. And like I said, it's cyclical. We go around in a circle, and eventually we're doing this for the whole farm. So the crop rotation, this is really setting that bar. What we plan to grow, what we're going to use it for, our target seeding date, the price of the crop, fundamentally important, because then I know with my target yield and the price of my crop, what my yield, what my potential might be. This will help me make economic decisions later for how much fertilizer I want to add. So we need to start with a realistic yield goal. Based on past performance, anticipated rainfall. Am I aiming for a 70 bushel wheat crop? Am I aiming for a 110 bushel barley crop? 60 bushel canola? Is that realistic in my area? Parts of the province, it isn't. So start with something that you're comfortable with to make our investment. And then, of course, we're going to make some considerations of the rotation. So if there was pulses in the past, what kind of nitrogen credit should I anticipate this year from last year's breakdown of pea straw or pea stubble, or the soybeans? So what is going to be in the system this year? If your yield was half last year what should have been, there's likely still some leftover nutrients that you can utilize when planning for this year's crop. So it's setting the bar. And I'm going to come back to this a couple of times. Like I said, it's influenced by the weather, what we're going to do, and it's rooted in economics. Whether you have your own seed or you're buying seed, you're going to be making some very large input cost decisions here. So when I say rooted in economics and what's practical, I did want to leave an example. This is just yield curves. These are, we have in a lot of our tools and our predictors of how much fertilizer you need are based on a whole pile of research, small plot research across this province that developed yield curves that showed crop yield increasing with various fertilizer application rates. And you can say eventually it increases, but it flattens out. So the only difference between these three lines is wet conditions, irrigation, or moisture part of the province, medium moisture conditions and dry conditions. But you can see the curve goes up and then starts to flatten out. And the only reason I want to make this point is well, that's not going to work very well. This will be quicker. Anyways, I'm sorry, my computer is just having an issue. So before I go any farther, I'll just sort of explain it. If I was looking at a 40 bushel wheat crop, 50 bushel wheat crop, roughly hitting this green line for high moisture conditions, it's a 50 plus pounds to the acre of nitrogen. Going up to a 60 bushel crop, I'm going to need 75 plus pounds of nitrogen. So that's a 25 pound per acre increase in nitrogen. We already mentioned that fertilizer is $1.20 to $1.40 a price. So even at $1.50 for easy math, we have the, it's like a $40 investment to get that 50 to 60 bushel yield difference. Hopefully the price of crop, and if canola was $20 a bushel, 10 more bushels is $200. So all of these came on quickly. I'm just going to back up. Sorry about that. I had clicked the mouse a few times. So when I use this example, so this means a $200 increase in income for the $45 to $50 investment in fertilizer. So very much positive on your end of the equation. But at a certain point, and I'm using this is now an increase of the same amount of fertilizer. So still a $40 increase in fertilizer, but I've only increased my yield by 7 or 8 bushels. And that might be still economical. And again, another $45 increase in fertilizer, and I've increased my yield again. I keep pushing my yield up, but I've only increased it another 5 or 6 bushels. So there's a certain point, and this is why I want to emphasize the economic part. There's a certain point where we're not chasing the highest yield. We're chasing the most economical yield. And if you want to invest $2 or $1 in fertilizer, you should be getting a $2 return in the crop. At a certain point, for every dollar you put in fertilizer, you're only getting $1 return. You might be getting more yield, but value-wise, you're only getting another $1. So this is why we're rooting in economics. So instead of chasing the highest yield, we're chasing the highest economical yield. What makes the most economical sense? I'm going to come back to that in a bit. But this is our crop portion of the nutrient management plan, deciding what crop we're going to grow. And that's based on the economics of what makes the most sense. Then I'm going to shift over and look at some field information. So looking at the organic matter, the current nutrient levels, any kind of chemistry that's limiting nutrient uptake, pH, salinity, et cetera, any factors that might affect how the crop is going to grow in that field. Because if there's a limitation, be it pH or EC, that's reducing water uptake or reducing nutrient availability or just generally reducing plant growth, putting the full amount of fertilizer on for a 50 bushel crop where the soil is going to limit it to, at most you're going to get is 30, doesn't make economic sense. So this is why I mean it's helping us determine that gap between we want that top yield or the top economic yield. What do we have for nutrients to help get us there? And what limitations exist in that field that might not let us get to 60 bushels? We should be aiming for 50. And we want to look at past performance of previous crops, past nutrient application, what rates and types were used, especially when you're using the manures and biosolids because they're providing you nutrients over time versus the fertilizers, which generally are readily available right now. Then we got our field information, past crop tillage practices, is there irrigation, risk of flooding. All of these are going to influence how we decide to put that nutrient package on, because it likely all won't go on with the seed, depending how we're seeding. It won't go in the seed row, but if they have mid-row banding, side banding, where we can create a separation, we can put higher amounts on. So that's our field portion. We started with the crop, we moved into the field, and the next thing we're gonna do is look at our equipment, how we're going to put those nutrients on. What kind of limitations do we have there? Because that's going to dictate when we're going to have to apply additional nutrients, looking at our timing and our risk of nutrient loss, and of course, staffing options. One of the biggest things our operations run into are staffing options. Everything needs to be done in a very narrow window here. So how are we going to get it done? So that means sometimes we move out of the ideal time to spread our fertilizer, which would be right before the crop needs it. But we run out of time to get it there. We can't get it there, especially in larger operations. So how are we going to facilitate that? Which may mean I have to put on nitrogen earlier than I would like to. So therefore, I am putting a coated product on. I'm putting on a product that won't go anywhere, or has some kind of inhibitor that will reduce the chance of it being lost. Because I can't be out there and put it all on right at seeding or within the first 5 days after seeding, or the first 10 days after seeding. These are the choices we make. Same with custom application. All of these things are going to affect the rate that we put on, because we might have to add a higher amount to account for some loss, or we're going to have to choose a different product that doesn't have that loss so that it's there when the crop needs it. Again, we're trying to target to reduce our nutrient loss. Finally, we look at our available sources. So we've looked at the crop, how much nutrients we have. We look at the soil, crop, how much nutrients we need, the soil, how much we have there, and if there are limitations, we adjust an application rate based on that. We look at our equipment, and when we can get those nutrients on the field, and adjust our application rate based on that, and then look at our fertilizer products, and either go with our traditional 4600, a fall or early spring anhydrous application, a coated product, because we're putting it on less than ideal timings or conditions, or we're using manure. So what we want to do is try to get the nutrient package on when the crop needs it, early growth, and not lose those nutrients. So what do we have to do that? Alberta, most of our runoff is spring melt. So that's our time of risk. It's also the soft soils. So we don't want compaction. So we have a very small window to get these nutrients on. When I said infield monitoring is the other thing that we try to do, again, very important for field scouting. And I know we're out there, we're looking for diseases, we're looking for insects, we're looking for other management reasons, but at the same time, we're looking at crop color. We may be tissue testing. We may just be looking at weather forecasts, knowing that our fertilizer package, and this is very common in corn, to top up with nitrogen later if the weather forecast has been very positive. So we start to evaluate our plan at the same time, but we're also sort of tweaking infield applications. So this is the more active part. We've transitioned a little bit from planning it on paper to now we've done it, and now we monitor it, and this is where we start to tweak it and change it. And if we need to add some fertilizer, be it a granular or a foliar, or through our irrigation pivots, if we need to add something, or start changing what we want to do in the future. We evaluate how well it's been working so far. And finally, our post-crop, now that we've taken it off, we're going to do our yield and quality assessment to see if they've matched what we were aiming for. We're going to start again with our soil analysis, and we're going to assess how profitable both that crop and our rotation is going to be, how effective our management was, and roughly how effective were the nutrients that we applied, so that we can do it next year and improve on it, because it's 36 nutrient management plans, and because a new one's coming out every year to do it. And they can be very consistent. So now you're just tweaking and improving the situation. And when I said we can get more complex, now we might be looking at how can we do it differently in the future, which might be, sourcing manure. It might be sourcing compost. We're going to hear compost a little bit in a while as a great soil amendment. We might be looking at other improvements we might want to make, either to our equipment or to our methods of application so that we can push it a little bit farther or a little bit harder or be more accurate with what we're doing. So essentially, that's to me is the nutrient management plan. We start with our crop, we take our field information, our equipment information, come up with what we need for a nutrient package to go on that field, and then start working at picking the right products to meet that need, monitor how it's going, and then evaluate and change. So I did say I was going to just briefly mention contingency planning. Yeah, we talk about nutrient management planning. It's a plan. It's going to change. I guarantee it. That's the only thing I can guarantee in the presentation is how it's going to change. And what you can do really depends on when it goes sideways. Product availability, early spring, changing input costs, early spring, you have a chance to change what your plan was or what the crop was or what you're going to use that crop for. Weather early on in the season, delays, or weather increased risks like flooding that happen that either leach out nutrients or result in nitrification or denitrification, nutrients going up the atmosphere. So equipment malfunctions, you know, it depends. What your response depends on that, but I'm really strongly suggesting that think about some of those things in advance because it'll save you time and money in the end. What your contingency is going to be if something goes sideways in your peas or your corn or whichever crop or by field. And the options really depend on when that goes sideways, you know, changing the crop, adjusting the target yield, especially if you we're looking at split applications of nutrients. You can decide whether to invest that additional $40 or hold it back and change your target yield or change the crop, the product that you're going to sell it for, whether it was going for grain or you're now going to take it as silage. You know, looking for alternative nutrient sources, and that's reaching out to our neighbors if you can get access to manure, which is one of the great reasons to be working with agronomists because they're working with some of your neighbors. Maybe they can find that. Or if conditions are really good, does it make sense to add anything in crop or split applications? I know response-wise, maybe low in many parts of the province, but there may be situation and conditions where that does make sense. And do you need to rent equipment or find a neighbor to help get some of this on at the ideal time? So really thinking about what happens when this goes sideways helps you when it does go sideways. It may not go the same way as you were preparing for, but as long as you've considered those options, you'll be in a better position to respond to it. Now, wrapping things up, some of the resources and tools, just for the the how-to, the nutrient management planning guide, which we have in the province, is used for various courses, really lays out the whole process with the actual numbers, doing calculations, implications of when we spread our manure and timing for nutrient loss. The Soil Information Viewer is a great resource that's online, allows you to get your soils information about the various fields. ACIS, this is climate information. We've got a couple hundred weather stations across the province. This is a great way to monitor weather conditions, what's planning or what's coming up. It's a great planning tool. And of course, the Alberta Farm Fertilizer Information and Recommendation Manager, FIRM, which has now been updated to include a lot more of the 4R research, manure, and a few other things. It's online. It's a great tool that uses economics to determine where best to apply your fertilizer budget in dollars. So, nutrient management planning, yes, it's not a straight line. It's going to be changing. Start with your field or crop, doesn't matter. Eventually, we're going to move to a rotation. Start small, be realistic, and take advantage of outside input in making it. Think of contingencies while you're doing it. That allows you to respond faster. So, that's it in a really quick nutshell. General nutrient management planning. We can go into the details any other time, but that's all I had, Matt.
Thanks so much, Trevor. Yeah, as everybody can see, there's a lot of information that can be utilized to create a nutrient management plan. There's a lot of details that go into it for farmers. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. We will get to the end. We'll wait after the next presentation to answer those questions. But our next panelist is Christina Seidel, who will be presenting on OnFarm composting. So Christina holds a PhD in engineering management. She operates Sonabera International Corp, a waste reduction consulting firm, and is the current executive director of the Recycling Council of Alberta. She's also a member of the National Zero Waste Council and the Canada Plastics Pact, as well as co-chair of the Plastic Alliance of Alberta. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I assume that you can hear me okay and you can see the presentation okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, I did this right. Good. We got over our technical glitches. That's great.
Yes, we did.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is, I'm really happy to be part of this session. And I think this actually follows really nicely on Trevor's presentation, as he mentioned, but this is, I'm going to be talking about another potential source of nutrients, and one that certainly is near and dear to anybody in the waste management field. So I'm going to talk today about a project that the Recycling Council of Alberta undertook, and basically to work with farmers on potentially building more processing of organics on farms, because nobody is better positioned to actually undertake this than farmers themselves. So that's really what led us to this. So I'm going to go through this project that we have introduced, and then hopefully we can have some discussion after. So you'll see that, and on these slides, just so you know, all the pictures on the right-hand side, these kind of, I think they're pretty cool pictures, are all out of the guide that we developed. So the guide that we developed is an on-farm composting guide. And the reason why we started this was we really identified an opportunity that we wanted to try to pursue. And that opportunity is that organics is a huge portion of the waste stream. Basically, it's over half of the residential waste stream, and it's over a quarter of the commercial waste stream. So a lot of that material may not be being fully utilized. And that's why we thought there was a great opportunity to actually look at other options for processing. And one of the real opportunities here too is not only is there a lot of organics, it's actually from a technical standpoint, compared to other materials that we try to divert, like recyclables, this is a material that we can actually take care of locally. Not only can we do it locally, which has tons of advantages in terms of not having to take it to a different facility, a different province, a different country, it actually then provides the opportunity for us to actually get the value right close to home of that material. And unfortunately, right now, the other thing that really drove us to do this is there is a strong lack of composting capacity in Alberta. We have nowhere near the capacity that we need to be able to take on the amount of organics that are in the waste stream. So that is something that's really important to us. This creates a problem, of course, for municipalities who handle residential waste, but it also creates a problem for the commercial sector. So the commercial sector that wants to reduce and divert their organic materials as well, they may not have an outlet for it either. So this opportunity and challenge at the start is also a great opportunity then for farmers potentially to not only access the nutrients available in this material, but there's also a significant business opportunity for farmers in becoming a processor of organics. It also, for us, creates a real opportunity for us to collaborate with different sectors, and certainly the agricultural sector is one that we would like to collaborate more with. So, of course, everybody knows, and this is what we always think of when we think of composting, there are huge benefits to composting. Obviously, that material has a lot of value. It can be a very, very good soil amendment. It can provide a lot of nutrients. It obviously takes materials out of landfills. It can protect water sources. And it can also then play a role in food security and the whole food security system. So there are lots of environmental reasons for why we would want to compost, and that certainly drives part of our decisions as well. So the project that we undertook then was to develop this information and share it with the agriculture community. So what the Recycling Council of the RCA did was we actually created a team to undertake this project. Once we identified it as a strong need, then we developed this team, and we put this team together, discussed how we were best able to pursue this. Then what we did is we actually approached a very successful on-farm composting facility, which is Stickland Farms. Stickland Farms is located just outside of Penhold, and they are definitely the leaders in this area. They are they are now a very large organics processing facility. And what's so cool about Stickland Farms, and the thing that really got our attention with them, is Brian Stickland set this up not as a waste management option. He set it up because he recognized that he was missing an opportunity that he could actually get more valuable nutrients for his own soils. So he is primarily a grain farmer, and he farms about 6,000 acres. So he has a lot of acreage that he then has to make sure that he has adequate nutrients so that he can get the outputs that he wants. And he really recognized this as being something that he thought would made sense for him to do in terms of doing a better job of looking after his own farm. So Brian really led the charge on this. And once I toured their facility, I went, wow, like this is so neat, because so many things in our business are about a lot of composting operations. They get set up because they're handling a waste material, and their real reason for being is to process that waste material. Well, in the case of Stickland Farms, that really was not it. Brian wanted the material, he wanted the nutrients. So it creates a very different motivation. And as a result, it actually affects the business model, and I think makes it much more successful. So if anybody ever gets a chance to tour Stickland Farms, I highly recommend it, because they are very successful and also very, at the same time, very technically correct. So they are doing a very, very good job of being an organics processor. So once we created that relationship with Stickland Farms, then we went out and found funding to be able to allow us to move this project forward. And then one of the key things we did too is we also built partnerships with both Olds College and Lakeland College. And bringing in the colleges, I think the agricultural colleges was really a key role for us to play in terms of not only helping the students with their education, but helping us with bringing them on board to help us with some of the elements that we had to do in this project. So they actually, Olds College helped us to develop a case study, basically set the groundwork for everything that Stickland had done. And then they actually carried it to the next step, was conducting an applied research project, which is part of what they need to do for one of their courses. So that partnership, I think, was really key. And then after, once we had completed the main part of the project, we actually then engaged Lakeland College, and they helped us doing some follow-up surveys. And again, involving the college and the students was really important, and I think was really effective. So what we did then after we'd worked with the whole college, set the foundation, really figured out what the baseline was, then we developed this on-farm composting guide. And so that was really the key deliverable of the project, was this on-farm composting guide. We then released that to agricultural stakeholders. We sent it out through a number of ag organizations, and we are still trying to share that as much as we can. One of the reasons why I'm here today is to be able to share that absolutely as much as we can, so that we, again, try to pique the interest of more farmers that might be interested in playing a role in this really important environmental and potentially business venture. So we also held some webinars last summer where we actually, similar to what I'm doing today, where we actually, again, tried to get out to the ag community, got as many of them to join the webinars as possible. And we are definitely looking at ways of spreading this even more. And you'll see at the end, I will share the link. Anybody can go on to the Recycling Council of Alberta website and can see the on-farm composting guide there. So that is something that is open to everybody, and we're hoping that lots will take advantage of that. So in the on-farm composting guide, you asked the question, okay, we wanted to do this. So what does the composting guide actually do? Well, what it does in a hopefully really accessible way is it really demonstrates the value that composting operations can provide, again, both to the environment as well as to farmers, really across the value chain, the benefits that can provide. But then perhaps the most important is it really encourages landowners to at least consider on-farm composting. And that doesn't have to be a huge operation. Like this picture on the right here is essentially, this is the idea of what Stickland Farms does. It does not have to be this big. It can be a lot smaller. And again, there is that opportunity for collaboration, because if you think of any communities around Alberta that are looking at diverting organics from their waste stream, they all need a place for that material to go and be processed. So there definitely is opportunity. We also see it, not only is this logical for farmers to get involved in, because farmers understand this, starting out, they know what this is about. It's an easy add-on for farmers. And so we think it also provides us with the opportunity of hopefully having more facilities spread more broadly across Alberta, because as I mentioned at the beginning, there are not enough processing facilities in the province right now. So getting more would be obviously very beneficial just in terms of being able to process that material. We also then provided some of the background on things like regulatory limitations, like what do you need to do to get started? Like what's required? What sort of research do you need to do? What kind of investment do you need? Like those questions, we really try to at least take a kick at the initial part of them in the guide, so that farmers can, again, have a really accessible way of looking at, okay, is this something that we actually want to get into? So the collaboration, as I mentioned, we worked with a number of different organizations, but I just want to reiterate and mention how important this collaboration was to be able to make this happen. So the Recycling Council of Alberta was the motivator, but we absolutely have to recognize the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, which is a partnership between the federal government and the Alberta government, that without that, we could not have done this, because this was our funding source, and we really appreciate Alberta agriculture, and they were so supportive and really helpful throughout the whole development of this project. So we really need to recognize that. And then of course the colleges, so important to involve them. And I think that was really a two-way benefit, so that they hopefully benefited with their students, and we certainly benefited from our side. But then Stickland Farms, boy, Brian was he's always so open with his motivations, like just even really understanding his story, how he got started, how he built on to what he first initiated and where he's at today. What an amazing story, and very educational too, just to learn how that all worked. So this is the collaboration piece, again, really critical to making this happen. So you'll see here on the bottom of this slide, this link, the on-farm composting. If you just go to recycle.ab.ca and go to on-farm composting, you will see where you can link and see this guide. And again, you saw the pictures, like we really tried to make it very accessible. And hopefully it's something then I encourage everybody on this call, not just to have a quick look at it, but feel free to share it with anybody, so that we actually try to, again, get the information out there and get more farmers in Alberta interested in actually becoming organics processors, both for their benefit as well as the benefit for their partners as well, which are many, including municipalities, businesses, lots that are part of the value chain that really need to be able to make use of these materials. So Matthew, I wanted to keep it short so we have time for questions. So I'm gonna leave it there. And then if we can jump into questions, I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah, for sure. I see we have 3 questions already. So first question, Christina, Do you know of any similar projects that are being conducted in Saskatchewan?
You know what? I actually don't. And that's a good question because we actually have pretty good relationships with our sister organizations. There's our sister organization in Saskatchewan is the Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council. I actually did a presentation for them at a fall forum they had just a couple months ago. I was not made aware that anything has actually happened, but again, we want to share this broadly. So hopefully that gets the guide out to Saskatchewan, and hopefully then Saskatchewan will build on what Alberta is doing, because there's no reason they can't do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. Next question. Is there a list of commercial sources looking for offloading opportunities?
I'm not sure I would say there is a list of commercial sources, but there is a mental list in my brain, and there are lots of them. And the thing about commercial sources, though, is the municipal ones are usually first because they're a little bit easier to access. The commercial sources tend to be consolidated through waste management companies. So whatever waste management companies collect their waste are likely the ones that would collect their organic materials as well. And I know since we started this, we actually toured a couple of farmers and business people in north of Edmonton who are very interested in this, and they have since set up an operation, and they are currently trying to work with some of the Edmonton waste management companies to make this happen. So work in progress. I think, again, the waste management companies are really key in this because they're the ones that provide that service.
Yeah. I had a question. Oh, okay, I found it. So another question here. So I reside in BC, and I'm curious if you encountered similar resistance to application of biosolids on land in Alberta.
I assume that's for Trevor.
It doesn't say, actually.
Well, resistance to application of biosolids, there's always been some resistance from crop farmers on taking primarily manure type products, less so compost than fresh manure, and it's always sort of stemmed from some of the material that gets into our manure. We've improved that a lot, but weed seeds has been a problem. Plastics, bones, or other material, and the other difficulty that cropping systems sometimes have with manure is the fact that manure is not all full of readily available nutrients. They come out. Some of them are readily available, and some of them come out over time. And so some operations found that a lot more difficult to manage compared to fertilizer, which is very much more predictable. That resistance has changed a lot over the years, and not to mention the neighbor relation issue. I don't think it's as big of a deal anymore as it was. I don't think it's as big a deal as it in BC, where neighbor relations have always been a huge driver to some land management decisions because of the closer population. There is still some resistance with biosolids coming out of the cities. That's managed a lot more for heavy metals, and there's a lot more work involved in that, but that program has grown more and more, both from the cities of Edmonton and Calgary, even the small municipal systems. So more and more people are taking it, especially with the price of fertilizer going up the way it was. Now, those comments are generally reserved mostly to the raw biosolids and raw manure. Less resistance, at least in the last many years, to compost from a soil building, soil benefit point of view. Properly developed compost, we're dealing with some of our disease stuff, we're dealing with weeds, being killed out in the process, and therefore far more favorable. But there is still some resistance, and grounded in a very good reasoning, be it neighbor relations or, just worry about weed and transfer of other material onto the landscape.
And Matthew, I will add too that the biosolids are a very key source of material for facilities like Stickland Farms.
Yeah.
And I know, I don't know if they're still taking it, but at one point they were even taking biosolids from BC. So yeah, biosolids certainly can be handled through these facilities.
Rob, I see Rob Lavoie, you asked a question. I don't know if you want to unmute your mic and ask, or if you want me to ask for you.
Sure. No, I can ask if everybody can hear me. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. For both of the speakers, for Trevor and I've just forgotten Christina. Is there any practical example of farmers growing cover crops that can be harvested and piled like a static pile for composting of the cover crop on marginal land, and using a composted version of that quote unquote green manure, I suppose, broadcasted onto high value land for cash crops? Is that anything that anybody's doing?
You know, I don't have the answer to that, but what I can tell you is the farmers that we're working with just north of Edmonton, they would, I'll bet you they would know the answer to that. So Matthew, I don't know if you can maybe connect me with Rob, and I can connect him with them, because that, if anybody would do it, they would be doing it, because they're very into not just organics management, but their whole farming operation is very focused on, I forget the word now, but the type of farming that is intended to be very natural and very sensitive to, I guess, to inputs.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
No, Rob, I don't know of anybody doing that exact idea. Not in that fashion. Most, we're still the early stages of cover crops. But most of it's being put back down into that particular field.
Right.
Our history was with sweet clover as a green manure crop, putting it down. But the closest thing I can say that I am aware of on those marginal lands is where we've gone out and bale grazed or swath grazed or fed our animals on them. Mm-hmm. To take that material out and that and the feces from the animals and putting to build that soil that way, rather than harvesting a crop in another location and bringing it over without, processing it through the animal.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is farmers that don't have access to animal.
Yeah. No. And it's not a bad idea, but no, I don't know anybody that has been doing that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yep. Appreciate that.
Yep.
Okay, I see. Hold, give me 1 second. Okay, I'll ask the question first. Another question I have here is, one potential opportunity that we are seeing here in the US is a farmer who buys a compost turn equipment and then goes farm to farm to do the weekly management. I guess not a question, it's more of a statement, but another question I have here is, are you using residential waste from cities?
Yes, 100%. That is, in fact, Brian, because he's close to Penhold, he actually already processes the green cart material from the city of Red Deer. He also takes material from other cities and towns that are close enough for it to make sense for him to take their material. So that is probably his primary source of material. So absolutely, that's one of the ideas that we were thinking of for this, is it makes sense for farmers to create partnerships with their local municipalities, so that otherwise the municipality has to come up with a facility themselves. It makes more sense for the farmer to do it, and then they can have a partnership to actually handle this material.
Yes, and the residential waste from cities, either from the composting point of view, but we're also putting that sludge or material in from a cropping point of view, be it directly on livestock type crops, not on the crop itself, but on fields growing for that. And there's also work being done for fast growing willows and using that for energy sources. So that was some of the work that Ag Canada was doing here around Edmonton. Getting back to Kevin Erb's comment about the custom compost turners, there are a couple in Alberta. I'm not sure how active they've been, but there were a few doing it for feedlots. Mostly doing feedlot manure. There was nothing else being brought in, as far as I know, or being added to the material other than what the operation itself was generating. But there were companies, or at least a couple of people, that had the large turners and going around doing it. That is another great option for producers. Buying capital, it's very expensive to get into some of those things, and it's great. When I refer to my presentation to custom operators, this would be just another custom business that you could hire for them to come on a regular basis to do the turning portion.
The one caution I would give to that question is that the actual equipment is probably the least important part of having a successful facility. It's the management that makes it successful or not successful. So really important that I could certainly see farmers pooling their resources, but don't think that you can sort of just walk away and just have the facility just run itself, because you need to give it constant attention to make sure that things are operating the way they're supposed to be.
Okay. From James Wilson, for compost being spread, how much is available to the crop? Also, how much of a difference is there between no-till and minimum incorporation?
Geez, I would have to defer that question to, we did work with a number of compost technical experts that really understand those details. So again, I could refer you to the person that would absolutely know the answer to that question. And in fact, Brian would know the answer to that question. And he works with an agrologist that helps with that type of thing as well. So sorry, I do not have that answer, but I could certainly get it.
And from our work, we're putting anywhere on from 3 to 6 tons of compost on. The availability, the readily available nitrogen, most of that's either been lost or converted to more stable nitrogen. So you're looking at several pounds or percentage. We're estimating around 20% in these ideal conditions may be available in year 1, and the rest of it coming out over time. The compost applications really start to see the bonus from them in year 2 of application through other uses. But I can't remember what the rest of that question was. I'm sorry, it's disappeared off the screen.
Oh, I can find it here. Here it is. Okay, so for compost being spread, how much is available to the crop, and also how much of a difference is there between no-till and minimal incorporation?
The only comment on the no-till and incorporation, generally when we're talking about our biosolids and with our manures or any products that have a readily available loss mechanism of nitrogen, anything that can be gassed off into the air, we often talk about incorporation. And we always balance that with the rate that's going on, how much is going on, and the cost of that incorporation. But with the composting, I'm less concerned of any incorporation. Surface application right into no-till systems, right in the farming system, because that readily losable nitrogen's already either been converted to a nitrate or already been lost through the composting process. So I'm not worried about compost being spread and not worked in. From a legislative point of view, in Alberta, manure biosolids have to be worked in within 48 hours, with the exception of being applied on direct seeded land or on forages. So it doesn't, under regulations, have to be incorporated within 40 hours. On regular conventional land, even if it is compost, it would have to be incorporated within 40 hours unless there's something else existing that would say they didn't have to.
Oh, awesome. So I see we do have a couple questions in the chat. I'll try to go back and find some here. The first one. Okay, so for the business to be financially positive for the farmer or grower, how many raw tons are needed to be handled? And in your example, how many tons is the one farm processing?
Yeah, and there is no quick and easy answer to that other than it depends. But stick-on farms has become, so as soon as you exceed 20,000 tons input that you're processing, you then get to a different classification from Alberta Environment, and you have to get extra approvals and certification, and you have to have an on-site composting expert there supervising the operations. But 20,000 tons is a fair amount, but that was really where Brian started. So Brian, I believe now is approaching 50,000 tons a year. That's a very large operation, and just goes to show how successful that can be. But it then leads into another question, which is about, do you sell the material? Like, where's the money come from? Do you charge to take the material, or do you sell the material? Well, you can do either, but I think what has made a lot of operations unsuccessful is they have relied on selling the material, and that's been their main income. When in the case of Brian, you would have to hold a gun to his head to take any compost away from him. He wants it all, and he will use it all. So his model is about accessing the nutrients from the material. And I think that is largely what has made him so successful. He does charge a tipping fee. Yes, you will charge a tipping fee for taking the material, and that would be the expectation. You charge a tipping fee to take the material, then you process it, and then you use it. So this is the advantage that the farming model has, is it doesn't rely on getting a bunch of money for the finished product.
That's great. I don't know what your guys' schedule is, Christina. We have a couple more questions if you guys are still available to add or answer a few more here, or?
I'm okay.
Okay. You're good too, Trevor. Okay. Can you speak to the legal and permitting side of using compost?
Yeah, there is actually, that's what I was talking about with Brian. Once you exceed 20,000 tons, you're in a different category. So yes, you need to have your facility certified. So you can do up to, I think it's 500 tons. And then Trevor had talked about the manure management side of things too. That's a separate category as well. And that's something that's a lot easier to do. But if you want to get into this, where you're actually taking broader range of materials, then you really need to make sure, and that's part of what's in that guide. The guide talks about that as to when you have to get different levels of certification and what your sort of administrative duties are in running the facility.
Okay, question from Rusty Stin, and you may have answered this already, Christina. I'm trying to remember everything we've answered so far. In your example, is the farmer processor being paid to take the tons, or is the final product where the dollars are being generated?
Yeah, that was that question I talked about before, where the value is in the material that you're producing, that you're using yourself in terms of the outputs, but you are charging, yes, everybody charges a certain amount to take the material in and process it. Because when you think about it, obviously that material would have to be managed. It's going to cost a municipality or a business to manage that material. And if you send it to a landfill, you're going to get charged a tipping fee. So there's that same type of transaction where you pay a tipping fee to take the material to an organics facility.
Okay. I have one final question in the Q&A. Agricultural lands are finite natural resource. The picture on slide 5 shows impermeable land cover on agricultural land. How is this being reconciled with protection of the agricultural land base? And is there a concern about multiple farms in an area for paving farmland?
I'm guessing that question is for Trevor.
Actually, I was thinking it was yours. We had the picture of the compost area.
Yeah.
I'm just going to slide 5. Oh, yes. Okay, that shows. And again, this all comes into the, the approval process of how much material you actually need. So you need to prepare, you obviously need to prepare the land properly to make sure that you're not going, you have to have things like reservoirs for runoff. You run it very similar, honestly, in terms of design to a waste management facility, where you make sure that you don't have unintended consequences, and that the operation is all contained within that particular facility. And if you go to Brian's facility, again, getting close to 50,000, or he can get close to 50,000 tons. And I would say his site is a couple acres. Sorry, that might not have answered that question.
No, I think so. The same thing applies, or the same requirements for composting and manure. Our facilities have a requirement for groundwater protection and surface water management, so it would be the exact same image that you saw with that slide, even if it was just pure manure versus manure plus biosolids or manure plus organics. It just one's covered with environments regulations, and manure only or on-farm waste, which can be more than manure, but it's generated by the farm. That one has similar requirements for groundwater and surface water protection and can be an acre or two in size.
Yeah, and I guess bear in mind too, if you think again of Stickland Farms, it's a couple of acres within a 6,000 acre holding.
Yeah. And we've had them where they've had them in the yard, like demonstrated here, but also agricultural ones that are doing their manure have been composting in corners of fields, pivot corners of fields, and turning those into composting areas, so that they were using space that wasn't being used for crop production, or was being used for a very reduced crop production because of the system.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, a lot of good discussion.
Yeah.
There's one, I think we got one more question in the chat. How much is the finished product worth by ton?
Again, I hate to use this answer, but it depends, because the material has to all be tested when it has been processed, and then based on the quality of it and based on, obviously, the value is really very varied. So there isn't no, but I would say the actual, it's going to be in the neighborhood of, let's say, $100 a ton, but it really depends on how it's tested and the quality of it.
Oh, that's awesome. So if there are no more questions here, I'll go over some end talking points before we end the recording. Anyone that's looking for CEU credits, just stick around to the very end. Even after the recording, I'll post it, I'll share it on the screen here. But I would like to thank everyone that was able to join us today. Trevor and Christina, I appreciate you both taking time out of your busy schedules to present to us here today. I know you guys are fairly busy, so please join us again next Monday, January 31st at 10 o'clock, where Edith Olson from Lethbridge College will present on soil salinity, and Stephen Tanis from Tanis Conservation Services will present on phytoremediation of nutrients in feedlots and storm ponds using floating islands. Till next time, thanks everyone.